That was yesterday. Students and parents gathering outside Granville Boys High School, along with teachers, chanting slogans like Allahu Akbar, in a protest organised by Teachers for Palestine, backing an imam who was supporting what the Bankstown nurses allegedly said on that now infamous video. Daniel Lukovitz, former Wentworth seat candidate and one of the most prominent figures in the security landscape in Sydney. He was one of the first people to identify what was going on at Granville, sharing social media posts of the protest, and he joins me in the studio. Daniel, thank you very much for coming in. This is a symbol of cultural failure, is it not?
Some of us have been paying attention to this for a long time. In 2005, in Werribee in Victoria, a visiting imam was telling students at a school there that Jews were putting poison in bananas. And it was shocking and it was outrageous and nobody was really paying much attention to it. And so it was 20 years ago almost to the day that this happened. And while nobody has been paying attention, it's led to the situation that we saw yesterday, where you now have people screaming Islamist war cries. And these are not Islamic schools. These are ordinary state taxpayer-funded public schools. And you have people there essentially calling for the genocide of the Jewish state, saying Allah Akbar, as you heard on the audio then. And this is a major, major problem that has been allowed to grow because leadership have simply been ignoring it, looking the other way. And when you look at the politics now of this happening in Jason Clare's seat and adjacent to Tony Burke's seat, you can understand where they now have the dilemma between the future direction of this country versus their re-election, and that's a very dangerous situation for the nation.
Yeah, we've made that point many times on the program. To protest like that, though, and being born in Australia, as most of those kids would have been, says a lot of bad stuff about what young Muslims think of what the nurses said. To support the imam supports the nurses, why are they following that extremist narrative?
I think it's a culture of perennial victimhood. So those two nurses, completely unprompted, completely unforced, said what they said. And it was disgraceful. And then having done so, the outrage that followed was entirely reasonable and entirely predictable. But they've now been made out to be the victims of some grand conspiracy. Well, I'm sorry, it wasn't some shadow conspiracy that made them say what they said. They said it, and they need to be held to account for it the same way you and I are going to be held to account for what we say into a microphone now. No one else is feeding ideas in our head. They did that, and so leaders within the Islamic community, and it wasn't just Sheikh Wissam, it was the Australian National Council of Imams, a number of other groups have basically...
49 other groups.
...have come out and said, no, this is unfair and the police are applying double standards, the government are applying double standards, and there's no sense of accountability, which tells me that there's no intention to solve the problem. And the reason that this has come about is because rather than having a cultural melting pot where migrants are absorbed into the community and take on the values of that community, we have enclaves and we have more of a salad bowl where you have communities that are very insular and they keep to themselves and they bring with them foreign conflicts into this nation that should have been left behind. And, the wolf is now inside the hen house. It's not an easy problem to fix, and it's a particularly difficult problem to fix when political leaders don't have the stomach to address it front on, which they haven't for 20 years. And I don't recall hearing anything even in the last 24 hours when ministers should have been on the front foot about this.
Yeah, I'm gleaning from my talkback callers that the public, vast majority of the public, are desperate for a leader to act on this twisted culture. What about the Education Minister, for one? You reached out to Federal Education Minister Jason Clare, as we have done this morning, to get him to tell us what he intends to do about this. His electorate includes Granville. What did you say to him? What did you get back?
Well, listeners can follow me on X at VoteLewko, VoteLewko, and they can see the message that I sent to Jason Clare, because the pinned post on his account says that education is our most valuable asset. And he's probably right, but I said, How valuable is it when you have students at public schools calling for the Jewish state to be wiped out when they're saying Allah Akbar? And to be clear, this wasn't happening before school. This was happening during school hours when those kids should have been in class and the adults should have been at work. And instead we had them leading an Islamist protest out the front of the school.
So shouldn't Jason Clare, as a first action today, give these teachers the boot from the state system?
I think big problems require big solutions, and this is not something that's going to be fixed by a stern lecture at a school assembly from the headmaster or maybe a few visiting guests. As I published online, I said that school needs to be closed down. You're not going to fix this with a Band-Aid approach. The students there need to be distributed widely so that that ideology can be diluted, and that's the way we get people to conform to an Australian set of values rather than a Middle Eastern Islamist set of values. I have absolutely no doubt that they're going to try and avoid this completely before the election because one of the people leading the chants at that rally is in fact an independent Muslim candidate who's running for election. So it's probably to some extent a political stunt on his half. But meanwhile, we have incumbent leaders who are sort of diving for cover for this because it's all just too hard. That's not going to fix the problem. It's just going to kick it down the road, the same way 20 years ago they were kicking the problem down the road until we received what we had yesterday and today.
And from a Jewish point of view, what does a protest like that do to people who in the Jewish community are centred around the East? What does it do to people who are trying to go about their normal everyday life?
Well, the irony is that at schools in the eastern suburbs, you now have counter-terrorism police standing outside the school. And in the western suburbs, we now need counter-terrorism police going inside the school. And this is a major breakdown in the fabric of the community, and it hasn't happened overnight. And I'm not hearing a firm solution to it, which is a problem. And by the way, there are any number of Muslims, including, for example, Indian Muslims who haven't come from the Middle East at all and they're not inculcated in that ideology, who have come here. This affects them as well.
Yeah.
Because you get ordinary Australians who ostensibly don't have a dog in the fight and they see this and they jump to conclusions which are not always correct. And, people are going to pay for it. But at the same time, I'm not seeing thousands of Muslims organising a protest and marching in the streets condemning this. Yeah. And we know that they can get thousands marching the street condemning things when it suits them.
We'd have to be ignorant to think that kind of protest would not inflame anti-Semitism.
100%. And, of course, we then get the absurd situation where you get political leaders who try to sort of talk out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. So they'll be talking about, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Yeah. And I'm sorry, there aren't mosques being set on fire. There aren't Muslims having convoys driving right through the middle of their suburbs. But they try to sort of burn the candle at both ends, solving a problem, rather than saying this is the problem and talking about the solution.
But they do that just to cover their sorry backsides. I want to go to Alan's call. He's been waiting for some time to make a comment about this topic. Go ahead, Alan.
I think you hit it right on the head with these kids demonstrating from that school. And I think the gentleman you're talking to is exactly right. That school needs to be closed down, and the reason being is that what you had said originally was the parents teaching their kids. Now, those kids are born in Australia. The parents have come from a country they wanted to get out of, but they bring their hatred and their poison to this country.
And they learn about it over the kitchen table.
And they're teaching it to their kids. Now, the gentleman's right. The teachers at that school are spreading the same hate and poison to those students. The education minister should bounce them, close the school and get them out of there.
But the statement from the state education minister, Prue Carr, last night was, they're going to be addressed at assembly today. Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, these people are they're being converted to the Muslim way, to the fanatic.
But an extremist version of the Muslim way because they're supporting gross anti-Semitism.
I was just about to clarify that. The average Muslim's a beautiful person, but these fanatical Muslims are not beautiful people.
Yeah. Alan, thank you very much for your call.
One thing I will say, Alan, is it's not uncommon for the next generation or children to be more radicalised than perhaps their parents. It depends on the influences they're exposed to. So there may well be the Muslim migrants that you refer to who've come to this country and they're quite moderate, but they actually watch in sadness as their children potentially get radicalised, and then they're faced with an awful dilemma, which is, do they report their own children to authorities, which is a real problem. And it comes down to the influences that these kids are exposed to, whether that's visiting imams or it's radical preachers or it's online content. And a lot of that is beyond parents' control and in many cases beyond the school's control as well.
But that's why we need a leader to step up and do something about what's going on at Granville Boys High. Daniel Lukovic, thank you very much for coming in.